Hey, it's KR from D&D Homebrew, talking today about ways that you can make your world seem more realistic to your players. And obviously, in terms of the world building that, I've done since the very beginning that we did, sandbox campaigns in the white box, we tried to make our worlds realistic. But the things about realism that tend to come into play in terms of a game are things like combat, right? When you start saying, well, wait a minute, shouldn't different weapons do different levels of damage? Or, what are hit points exactly? And we would try to justify that and, make it realistic, or wounds or healing or death. And then, you had like dungeons. And there was a period there where we tried to make them realistic by having, dungeon ecology and why things could live there, and phosphorescent plants that could create light. And, then it went into the Underdark, and then they would build these cut stone rooms in their under. I mean, it was all this stuff to try to make something that essentially was not realistic, endless dungeons under the ground, into something realistic. But what I'm talking about is when the players go through your world, what are the elements where they think, wow, this seems like a real world? This is real. Well, what it is the details. What it is thinking about as they're going along. And again, it's not all flavor. It's not just that. It's partly that. But it's also their interaction in a way that is realistic, and, when we compare it to the real world, that verisimilitude, right? So one of the best ways to make your world seem real, actually, it takes a little work. This is historical depth. This is creating a history of the area that goes back, as far as people can remember, into myth. Now, this takes a little bit of work, so this may be one where you say, because I know people that go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have a 10-page or a 100-page, history of my world to hand to the players. I'm just going to have a couple of cities, and this is why I always do a frontier world, so I don't have to do as much. If you create a world of kingdoms, and these kingdoms of, let's say something like ancient China, thousands and thousands of years, that's a lot of history. So that's a lot of work. So that's why I tend to do the frontier world. But I still have a history. Everybody knows it. Because if you can't ask people about the history, if you say as a player, well, how long has this city been here? Who founded it? What's the history of this place? And they can't answer because the GM doesn't want to do that. Or you just make something up on the fly and it doesn't really matter. And it's not realistic. It's gamey, right? So having a history, having people be able to describe, I can pretty much describe the history of the United States to people, right? I can describe, the history of Europe and how people came to the United States, discovered it, Columbus, which of course for the people that were here were like, discovered what? But and then they have a history. I'm not a historian, but I have a certain level of knowledge. Most people do. Simple people maybe don't. A simple person in the field, why are you asking me those questions? Why are and again, they don't know. So I get that. But an educated person, which is usually the type of people the player characters are interacting with, they know something about the history. So again, if you don't want to do that, if you want to make it that's great. And we're like, oh, there's no history in this person's world, so we just ignore that. And the players may not be that interested in it, but anytime they ask and you've got an answer that you've thought about, it makes your world seem real. Here's one that can sometimes seem like flavor, but weather and seasons. If you say it's springtime, if you say it's, the high summer, it's fall, there's harvest going on, and something's going to interrupt those harvests, right? Or the onkegs are out, they know the farmers are in their field or something, that if there's 4 seasons in your world. Now we used to run the classic Mediterranean, right? It was kind of summer and spring all around. But again, if there's a festival that occurs in a season or whatever, anything like that, the world, except for certain equatorial places or whatever, but there's a temperate zone, which is where I live in the United States, we have seasons, right? It's hot in the summer in the south. It's nice up here in the north, but it's cold, right? It's cold right now. I'm shooting this. So thinking about seasons, you don't have to get into elaborate weather charts. You don't have to roll every day, pouring rainstorm, you can't go anywhere, that kind of stuff. You could have a raining season and it's the rainy season, it's hard to travel, you go slow, it becomes difficult terrain, things become concealed. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. We tend to isolate that to geography. But it makes your world real, that there is weather, there are seasons. So I'm telling you, think about that and think about how you can incorporate it without too much work. Just come up with a little framework. Here's the time periods. Because again, hopefully you're tracking time. Because if you're not, that's a lack of realism, right? And again, the way time works in a lot of games is not very much time ever goes by. So, you can run a month of real time, could be a year. So, okay, it's just high summer, right? But if you're going to spend downtime doing things and everything, the seasons can change. And, I'm going to go from that to the mundane, to like people, doing this, what that people say is flavor. So let's say the players go into town. They go to the market square, and you're describing the market. There's people haggling over the merchants' booths. There's some acrobats over here entertaining. There's children playing. There's dogs running around. There's some guys are herding some cattle at some place, and a battle occurs. Okay. Now, where is that battle? And the players have instigated this, or the players see their enemies, and they decide to attack them right here in this town square, or something flies over, because there are consequences in your world that I'll get to. Well, suddenly there's children in the town square. What do you do as a player? You say, I don't care that they happen to be there. I'm blasting away or whatever, right? Much less, merchants or innocent people or whatever, or the cows, some explosion and these cows stampede or whatever, right? All those little flavor details that created some realism to the town square are suddenly operationally important in the game. Again, you're in a crowded tavern and people are all just yelling and partying down and whatever. That's a different, and you say that this is a raucous place versus there's two people in there and nothing's going on. So now if you're going to have a conversation and maybe one of the people there is listening to the players and he can overhear them, or he's at a booth nearby because it's quiet. That's realism. That's the idea that this place is an actual place and has an environment that the players have to deal with. And you're thinking about that when you're in your descriptions, you're thinking, how am I going to make this place seem real? Then what are the consequences of that? And here's another one that I've harped on in many, many videos, the cause and effect, the consequences, whatever. I'm always telling you, this makes your world realistic. When the players do things, there are consequences. There are after effects. Some are really good. They help somebody out. They trust them. They give them more information, more, missions, more however your world works. But there's other people that don't like it. The players grow in renown, and there's reactions to that. The players become political operatives in the world that either just through their actions, their presence, their level, their power, their potential to help people or hurt them, being asked to take part. If they start to, give your players opportunities to buy things, businesses and things like that, a tavern, whatever it is. I have my players right now in my Pathfinder gold mine. They've got all sorts of stuff going on. But that makes them players, and that means consequences. People are jealous. Competitors are like, what's this? Or powerful figures in the world start taking notice of them. So think about the consequences of what the players are doing in terms of the society and the humanoids, but also monsters and things. I always say, if you don't kill them all, or if there's just a small group of something larger, there's consequences, my friend. And that makes your world realistic. I did a video on languages and how you can use them, so I'll just mention here that language diversity in your world really makes it real. Having common is just this common tongue, and ignoring that's fine as a game device. That's why it's there, to avoid the frustrations, because we depend so much in the real world on communicating. But having some diversity and saying these people speak a different language and they don't speak common, it's realistic. It makes your world seem real, and it's just something to think about. And here's one that we violated all the time in the old days. We didn't care about this, but you may want to in the moderns, especially with the map-making devices, is geographic logic. Rivers flow from the high to the low, usually out to sea, perhaps into some lake or something like that. You can have this ectothermic lake or something that doesn't, they usually become salty with brine. You don't necessarily have swamp and desert right next to each other. There has to be some. We did that. I've got maps that have that. Well, first of all, we were like 13 years old, but also that wasn't part of we just wanted to explore the wilderness and what's in desert hex, what's in a swamp, what's in mountain. Oh my God, there's 3 rolls a day for random encounter. We're fighting. That's what we wanted to do. We didn't care so much about that. But if you want your world to seem realistic, then geographic logic, mountains, and then you have hills, and then you have other terrain. You have light forests leading to, huge, large forests. Swamps are where rivers either drain into or they go into a marsh. A swamp is actually a drainage area for just water in general. A marsh might be where a river flows through things. The cities are on the coast. They're on where there's water, right? For transportation, a river provides fresh water. Obviously, they can have wells and things, an oasis in a desert. That's where people are going to live. It makes sense. You just have this vast city, and it's in the middle of this burning desert. How do they get water? Well, there's an aquifer underneath. Oh, okay. Someone discovered that, and now this place is livable. So just think about geographic logic. There's all sorts of resources for this too, in terms of building maps. I think Bob, no, not Bob World Builder, the other guy. Oh, I can't think of his name. I'll put his name right here, his website. He does stuff on logic in maps that's really good. I've looked at it. It's really helpful. And then the final thing I would say is if you're going to have any kind of societies, even if you have a rustic frontier world, there's going to be economic relationships and political relationships where people are doing services or, trading, even if it's barter. We get wood from our thing and we get grain from this place back and forth. And you have those so that it makes sense that people have food to eat, can make shelters, can warm themselves when it's cold, have a structure, can have animals that help them, cows give milk, chickens, eggs, all that kind of stuff. There's an economic and political system that makes sense, even if it's super primitive. And again, you don't have to write tomes and all this for any of these, right? The history can be just generalized, these economic systems. But if you think about them, and if you create them and then you incorporate, and when the players encounter things, encounter this, this place, they're known for their mahogany wood. And they're very secretive about where exactly it is, or they protect it really well. But they use this wood and they barter and they get, trade goods, fine axes to cut this down, right? Or all sorts of things that they can't get where they are, salt or something like that, spices. They need to trade for those, and it makes the meat they eat palatable. That's how people live. That's what's real about a world. And when you set that up and you show that as flavor if you want, but then the players have an opportunity to do something. There's rumors that there's even greater mahogany grove out here, and the players agree to go out there and clear this out of the indigenous people that live there, right? Talking about exploitation. But there's a reason that people want that. There's a reason people want rare gems and rare spices and all that stuff, because they can trade for it. It makes them rich, which is what people want to, again, the old guru, when they ask him, what's the one thing everyone shares? He goes, everyone is greedy in all my experiences. They want to make more money. Like players are greedy too. And when you have an economic and the political intrigue, just again, aligning yourself, there's consequences for the players. There's people that want to be in charge. Even a rustic village of 500 people, somebody wants to run that village. And they have rivals that want to run it, or a town or a city or business interests or whatever. And when you develop those and think about those, again, makes your world realistic. And again, a shout out to my Patreon supporters, guys. I really appreciate you making maps, making scenarios, creating monsters. It's been so much fun to do that. And if you enjoy the video, please give me a comment on how you make your world realistic. Or if you don't even care, that's fine too. Because the important thing is to play an RPG game, whichever one you choose, and tell somebody else about it.